Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder and this is BRN AM for Monday, September 21st, 2020. And our top stories today, running numbers or running from numbers, and the coronavirus will lead to significant disruption for higher education. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Rick Seltzer. He's an editor with Inside Higher Ed. Hi, Rick. Welcome back to the program. Great to see you this morning.
Good to see you too. Thanks as always for having me.
Oh, it's great. This is such an important topic. Lots of kids going back to school. And, I want to talk about, or I know you wrote an article and did a lot of research on transparency as it relates to some of the statistical models for some of these public universities to reopen. What can you tell us about your analysis?
That's right. Yeah. And bear with me for a second because this stuff gets really juicy, even though statistical modeling can sound a little dry at the outset.
It's a little droll.
Yeah, but it's important because what we did is we did a multi-month project trying to understand how did college leaders decide to reopen campuses in the fall? What did they think about? What risks did they think about to students? Were they concerned about viral spread outside the community? Were they concerned about potential deaths as a result of their decisions? The best way that we thought, or that I thought, to get at this was to say, okay, we know that there is epidemiological modeling that is going on. Some universities have referenced it. Some faculty members have referenced it. They are predicting, here's the curve. If you bring this many students back, you can say we can expect this many infections by this date. It's not going to be right, but kind of unwrapping that and looking at it will help us understand what exactly were they thinking about? What assumptions were they making? Were they assuming students would say, skip partying, which has turned into a big question this fall? So we did public records requests, and again, another really exciting journalistic thing, but we did public records requests for about 20 public universities across the country. It was skewed towards the really wealthy or well-resourced ones with medical schools. But we also did some community colleges. And out of those 20, exactly one was willing or was able or did share anything that looked like statistical modeling with us. One. Now, there were a few others that definitely did it and actually have been transparent about it. So the University of Illinois has really been beating the drum, or had been beating the drum, about their modeling and testing program. They did not return documents to the request. So public records requests are always a little bit of shooting in the dark because you have to craft language that will get what you want. Even though sometimes the documents may be named different things at different universities and you may not know exactly what the names are. So it's possible that some places misinterpreted it. Some of them told us that. Other places were just not responsive at all. I want to give a lot of credit to community colleges, the least resourced institutions that we queried. They flat out said, we didn't do this. We didn't have the resources to do it. We worked with our local hospitals or our local health systems or our local county health departments to figure out what's the best way forward here. Several public universities didn't take that tactic. Specifically, there were two that were real bears to work with, and I still wonder why. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill did not return any documents. You may remember that Chapel Hill brought students back early, saw some major spikes on campus, and then did not have enough quarantine rooms and actually had to send students home. They did not return responsive documents. Their public affairs office refused to answer 4 yes or no questions about whether they did modeling or not. And in the weeks since, there's been some reference in student press there to different administrators emailing models to each other. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. I think the whole situation is a real shame, and I'd really like to understand it better. The other case that was a real struggle is Penn State University, which actually was not in our original dragnet that we put out, because Penn State is exempt from the state of Pennsylvania, or I should say the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's public records law. So if you are a taxpayer whose money goes to Penn State, you still can't get public records from them. Penn State has a plan that several faculty members think does not test enough. That faculty group put out their own statistical modeling. That's how I got interested in the situation. They put out their own saying, here's what the curve is under your current plan. Here's what the curve is under a plan that tests a little more or a little more. we could be in for some real struggles here if we don't think about this. And Penn State essentially blasted that faculty group as wanting to keep the university closed, and then did not. Yeah.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want
no
to,
problem.
what are some, I mean, really great reporting here, great analysis, and I guess what are the takeaways here? If someone, you're not being transparent, I mean, what is there to quote unquote hide? I mean, these are not, theoretically not secrets. And then what are the takeaways if you're a parent of a student who's going back to one of these public universities? I mean, what are you thinking if you're paying a expensive tuition or semi-expensive tuition? What are your takeaways here?
Well, that's right. That's a great. It's a great point. Thank you for getting me back on track here. I mean, the point here,
it's all good. Great information.
The point here is not that that these universities refuse to talk to a journalist. That doesn't matter so much as we don't know exactly what went into their fall reopening decisions. And remember, they were putting out press releases. I don't know the exact dates on a lot of these, but many universities put out press releases in April or in May about how they would be reopening for in-person instruction if at all possible. Well, the data situation changed since then. And hopefully universities which talk about science and talk about being evidence-based will be forthcoming with what went into their decisions. I think the other real big important takeaway is, and a lot of scientists I talked about, and to give some universities credit, some private universities, a lot of people did work and put the modeling out there. Putting it out there actually helps you understand what you're missing. You'll see this whenever anyone does any kind of mathematical analysis or statistical analysis, we're not going to understand exactly how the world works. There's a saying, all models are wrong, some are useful. But putting it out there, you can look under the hood and say, okay, this university is expecting to need this many quarantine rooms. They have this many quarantine rooms, or they don't have this many quarantine rooms. Or this university is expecting everyone to wear masks. Is that really realistic? Should they bring in someone about adolescent behavior to say, should we really expect everyone to follow the rules all the time? It's a question of how much were they interested in bringing different groups to the table related to this decision, and how much were they willing to do that in order to minimize the risk of bringing students to campus, having them sign leases, and then potentially have to send them home or confine them to their dorm rooms a couple weeks later.
To your earlier point, I don't think anyone is expecting here perfection. We know that based on the federal and state and local responses, perfection doesn't exist. It will never exist on anything done by man. I think when you comparatively look at what's being done at universities versus the National Football League, for example, where the football players are wearing contact tracing diodes or brackets that basically can tell who they are around. And granted, that's 53 people versus 53,000 people. But I just get the sense that transparency is best, to lay out your plans. The only thing I can think is that either they didn't do it, or they just, maybe from a competitive point of view, they don't want to disclose this information.
Right. Well, and there is definitely, I do not want to make it sound like I think these officials are in an easy position. They're not, right? They will be second guessed. No leader likes to be second guessed. None of us like to be second guessed.
No.
And it's not like there's no right answer here, right? Bringing students back, not bringing students back, someone's going to be unhappy with it no matter what. You run the risk of making the quote unquote wrong decision no matter what. But yeah, the question of whether you did your due diligence or whether you said we are reopening no matter what, let's figure out how to do it. Those are just different questions. And particularly for public institutions, which are really important parts of their community, really important parts of our economy, really important things for students' careers, I think it is fair to ask. And I think it's important that we ask, what did you do? And maybe how could we do it better? Because let's face it, this thing's probably not going to go away before next semester.
Yeah, well, if I were a parent, I'd be asking those questions before I sent my child off to school, even if they are 18 or over. Rick, I want to hold you over. When we come back, we're going to talk to Rick about, well, basically a financial checkup of how colleges and universities are doing in light of the pandemic, and many of whom just reopened. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
The windows on our homes, they protect us and the ones we love, but they do much more. At Renewal by Andersen, making your home more comfortable is at the center of every window we make. It's why we custom build our windows in America and install them in as little as 1 day. It's why we build our frames with exclusive FIBREX composite material that's 2 times stronger than vinyl. It's why our glass helps keep your home warmer in winter, cooler in summer, and quieter all year long. It's why we stand behind every window with a 20-year limited warranty. Why not help lower your energy costs while giving your home and family the best? Call 1-800-835-6525 to schedule a free in-home consultation. Buy one, get one at 40% off with this special offer. Plus, get special financing with no money down, no monthly payments, and no interest for 1 full year. Renewal by Andersen, the better way to a better window. Call 1-800-835-6525 now.
Welcome back. We're talking to Rick Seltzer of Inside Higher Ed. Rick, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Thank you.
Really interesting topic. You know, the topic of reopening, so important. I know many parents out there and students really concerned about going back and what that means. Let's talk about what the pandemic impact has been financially to these schools and universities, even some of whom have reopened.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks of really bleak news in some cases. You know, you're seeing furlough announcements, some layoff announcements, major budget gaps, particularly at large universities. In some cases, leaders taking pay cuts. But one of the things that's hard is that we don't have a lot of good, reliable data at this point on enrollments and what happened to enrollments across the country. Higher ed enrollment and financial data tends to lag pretty significantly. Financial data, especially. If you're looking for audits, don't look for them until a year or a year and a half later.
Yeah.
So I kind of look for early indicators to say are things shaping up the way that people are saying they're shaping up. One of the interesting things that came out just recently is from one of the country's largest developers of private student housing. It's American Campus Communities. It's a Texas-based company, and basically they either build student housing developments next to universities or near universities, or in some cases they manage university housing for the universities. They have about 138,000 beds at 201 properties across the country, so they're pretty substantial. You're looking at, if they were their own university, they'd be very big. And what they saw is lease rates fell by about 7 percentage points if you compare this September to the end of September last year. And then there's a really interesting split within that. The properties that were aimed primarily at first-year students dropped much more than those that were primarily housing sophomores or upperclassmen. The first-year student lease rates dropped by about 16% to 79.5%, so right about 80%, while the properties targeted at students who'd already been in college for a year or more, they only dropped by about 5 percentage points to 92.8%. The good news if you are American Campus Communities or one of its investors, it is a publicly traded company, is that the company has overwhelmingly more beds for upperclassmen. Overall, it's still seeing about 9 out of every 10 beds leased.
Wow.
But I do think this is an early indicator, number one, that the concern we've heard about first-year students either not enrolling or being skittish about enrolling is real. American Campus Communities said in a statement that many universities sensed reluctance on behalf of first-year students to travel to campus if instruction was going to be online or primarily online. And so a lot of the campuses relaxed their residency requirements, and that ended up hurting its lease rates. So I think that's really important. The other big takeaway here is students are coming for off-campus housing in many cases, as we know, as many outbreaks of the virus have been traced to off-campus housing and off-campus parties specifically. But also, I think kind of within this, it's important to remember that this data probably isn't picking up much of anything for low-income students or those from traditionally underserved or minority families, because those students are much less likely to be living in this housing in the first place. And there's been a tremendous amount of concern among colleges and universities that those students will be enrolling in much smaller numbers. That matters if you care about who goes to college and different walks of society going to college. It also matters if you care about colleges being able to make their budgets work, because those students get various financial aid from the federal government, or in many cases pay also themselves. So there's a real financial impact there too. Overall, I think it's a reason to continue watching to see just how much enrollment is down. Yeah. It also is a reason to ask about something that's a pretty significant chunk of college and university budgets, which is auxiliary revenue. It depends on the university, but auxiliary revenue makes up anywhere from about 5% to 31% of the colleges and universities that Moody's Investors Service rates. And Moody's tends to rate institutions that have a stronger position. So it's probably more. In fact, I've looked at financials for universities where auxiliary services make up more. And auxiliary services are things like parking and dormitories. So if you see leased rates fall, if you see students coming to campus less, that takes a big bite out of universities' financial flow. And it can also take a big bite out of their ability to meet bond requirements. Moody's actually just had a report out recently that said auxiliary service revenue is at risk of decline. That could actually drive some colleges to be breaking debt covenants. Now, typically what's expected here is that the debt covenants that are broken are things like reserve ratios. So they're not expecting actual defaults on payments, but it does kind of show that the health here of the sector is eroded considerably from what was already a sector that some were concerned about long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick, I mean, we've been reading about sports. Sports are a big part of revenue of universities, even if they're Division III or they're not Division I. I mean, we've talked about this on the program before. We've heard from coaches in the NFL and in college saying free the Big Ten. Some schools are not actually playing sports this fall. They're delaying it until the spring. What's the impact there? Do you have a sense for what that could mean to the bottom line for these universities and colleges?
Yeah, I do not. I have not reviewed any of those numbers recently. Generally speaking, I think it's up in the air. The Big Ten, the Big Ten's a really interesting case because there's all sorts of discussion about, should we hold the season starting in Thanksgiving? Should we do it in the spring? When do we do it? How much do we do? I think it is definitely fair to say that this has had a major impact on university cash flow. It's had a major impact on athletic departments. We've seen athletic departments taking pay cuts as well, or I believe there was one university that actually had to furlough a bunch of its athletic staff. The NCAA, I believe, furloughed much of its athletic staff for a period. So the other angle there that's important is, outside of the big-time revenue-producing sports or revenue-producing university, the D1 Power 5 conferences, athletics is very important in recruiting. Many students who can pay to go to college want to play sports in college, and many D2 or D3 programs take advantage of that and say, we would love to have you play on the whatever it is, field hockey team, rowing team, tennis team, what have you. That's a way for them to actually keep their enrollment where it needs to be to make their budgets. And if places are not having sports, does that hurt their recruiting for the future? Does that hurt the likelihood that their currently enrolled athletes will remain there? Some colleges and universities deal in 100 or even a couple tens of students can make or break their budget. So this is a much bigger deal than it might seem from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think just on the last week we had a show with Betsy Mayotte of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, Rick, and obviously so much going on with student loans, people paying off their loans, and obviously it's a real concern. What are you getting are you getting enough for what you pay? I think there's going to be many more financial implications in the months, weeks, years to come. Rick, always a pleasure chatting with you. Great research, great data as always. Looking forward to catching up with you later. Best of luck. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. I'll look forward to it.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest or someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.